Good morning. My name is Andrea Redsky. I'm here to show you how to gather birch on this beautiful spring day. And I also wanted to introduce myself in my language. Bonjour, Jashkokizik Indigenous, Atika Totem, Sholek Undunji, Treaty 3 Undunji. I hail from Treaty 3, but we are on Treaty 1 territory right now, so I do appreciate being able to gather this medicine here. And we call it a medicine because it is something that helps us, and bringing back this birch bark making is something that I'm endeavoring to do. So I wanted to show how we use this template. And this is the template that I use in order to measure the birch or the tree that I'm going to be gathering from, and also what I use to trace out on the birch once we've gathered it off of the tree. So it is really important to do this in the springtime because the water is flowing through the tree, saps are flowing through the tree, and it's easier to gather. So right now the really fine outer bark has come off this spot here that I've already scored once. So what I do is I take a very sharp knife, or what I'm using today is another type of cutting tool. You could use carpet cutters, work really well, but X-Acto knives work well in addition to that. But you have to be very careful with an X-Acto knife. Now, I've done birch bark gathering for quite some time, but I always tell people that are new to it to try and use a tool that is really sturdy in the hand, because you don't want to cut your finger off. So you take your birch or your template and you just wrap it around where and estimate where you're going to want to gather the birch from. And the reason for that is you want to have a tree that is big enough. You know, you wouldn't want to gather from a small tree like this one because you wouldn't be able to get enough birch off of it, and that would be a waste of that birch bark. So you take an estimated amount here, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to gather the birch that doesn't have a bunch of knots in it. So I've looked at this tree and I see that there are a couple little knots here and there, but nothing too bad that will affect the basket. So I score all the way around the tree using the knife, and I try to get, you know, relatively deep into the tree, so I'm exerting a fair amount of pressure here, because there are a number of layers of birch bark that encapsulate this piece of bark. And then there's an inner bark, and we gather it in the springtime so we're not damaging the tree as much as we would if it was later in the year. So we do this during springtime, and we're in the late spring right now. I would normally only do this in the early spring, but for these purposes it's still spring, and so we're gathering today. So I've scored the top, the bottom, where I plan to gather from, all the way around the tree. And then I come back to this spot where I scored all the way down the length of this area. And hopefully I'll be able to just gather this all off in one fell swoop around the tree. So we'll see what happens here. Now I have to pry my way into this and continue to score along this line here. And then as I continue on, I don't use the knife or anything else, because what will happen is it'll make marks on the other side of the birch, and I don't want to do that because that's going to be the side that shows on the basket. So quite often we'll use the inside because you can make some really intricate designs, but then there are those who like the outer bark to show, and you could do that as well. You can make your basket that way. But there are several layers here that I'm cutting through. And just a reminder, this is the kukum in me, the mother in me, that when you're doing this, because you're using sharp tools, please remember to bring band-aids just in case. But we do have a really good medicine tree very close to us here. We have a tree here that is called balsam, and that tree, you can use the sap like a band-aid, and it also has like the little bubbles, so you just poke it with a stick, wipe it on wherever you're hurt. It will close and seal that wound up real easy. I'm not going to demonstrate that for you, I hope, today. But it also is an antiseptic, so it'll keep that wound clean until you can bandage it again and wash it with some water. For me, it doesn't take that long, and people always say, oh my gosh, you always make it look so easy. And then they try it and they go, that's hard. And I always have to remind them that practice, makes a difference. So I've been practicing this for a good 10 years, I guess. Certainly not gathering a lot of birch, one maybe a year. One piece a year, because usually the baskets that I make are made for gifts for other people, in particular my elders. And one of the things they always say is that they're really grateful that I'm keeping this, I'm going to move over here, keeping this way alive. So as you can see, I'm pulling the bark now. And it's coming away from the tree, but you really have to be careful, because it can crack right down the middle. So you can see the inside here as I'm pulling away. I'm getting a really good piece of it. Slowly pushing around and around this area. And that's why it's really important to score the top and the bottom too, and not just down the length of the tree. And there we go. So if you can imagine, our ancestors, our elders used to use this for wigwams. These pieces, it's kind of like siding all the way up and around that wigwam, and they would carry this with them. This can stay flat like this if we just put a bunch on top of each other, if that's what we were doing. Or they use these for their boats. Canoes are made out of, birch bark canoes are made out of this method, this way, taking from the tree while it's on the tree. What happens when the tree is felled, it stops, life stops in it. And so when you try to gather birch bark, even a day after, it's almost impossible to gather birch like this. It will come off really thick and you'll be taking some of this inner bark with it. But if it's dead, I guess it's okay. But we want to make sure that this inner bark stays on the tree. It does take a long time, at least 20 years, 15 to 20 years for this outer bark to go back. But this is still protecting the tree. And, I always used to feel bad looking back and seeing that I've scarred the tree, but I learned after talking with my elders that we put our tobacco down, and we did that before we took from this tree. And you know, ask this tree to do what it is that you want it to do for you. And right now it's teaching, and I think that that's a really important aspect to carry on for our young people and those of you who are involved in this course. Learning a little bit about your culture and the ways of knowing and doing of our ancestors, and being able to make a birch bark basket and learning the math behind it is also going to be something that I hope that you have a fun time with. I'm not certain that you'll actually use birch when you're doing this, but it can be also done with other, these baskets can be made with other materials. Just for learning purposes, but if you wanted to actually make a birch bark basket, it is quite an endeavor, especially getting out into the bush and finding the perfect tree. So with that, I say miigwech, and hopefully you'll learn a lot in the next phase of what we do when we actually make the basket. Now here we are sitting in a nice area out of the bush in a clearing, and we're going to start making the birch bark basket. So what I used the template for in the bush was just wrapping around the tree so that I knew I was going to get enough bark off of the tree in order to make this basket. So what happens is this template is notched in these areas here in order to have the basket come together in a way that is the bottom part of the basket. And this basket is a square bottom basket, and then it comes together at the top and it rounds out. Now you're not going to be able to do that with cardboard, but you'll see where those notches are. They're important because it creates the bottom part of this part of the basket. And if put together right, this basket can actually hold water and hold other things, rice, berries, whatever. A lot of people, what they do is they put their traditional medicines in here, like their sage. This is about the size of the basket that we're going to get, which is you know, a medium-sized basket. It's not too small. One of the reasons why I choose this side is because I can still get my hands inside for when we're doing the threading and the lacing. I'm going to be using sinew. Typically what we would use is a spruce root, but that isn't gathered until like September typically. We would gather that the year before, and we'd have a whole bunch of that on hand, and it's used for lacing as well. But because we are here in May, we don't have any of that, but I do have sinew and it works just as well. So I put the template in place on here, and as you could see, I probably could have made a larger basket, but I will use the remainder of what's here for other things. Jewelry. It's interesting that there's a lot of birch jewelry being made now, so I can use it for that, or just little etchings. So this side of the birch, as you can see where I've etched some of this, is the side that I'll probably use, but not necessarily. I may end up using this as the outside of the basket, but we'll see how things go once I've etched it and cut it and start putting it together. So I've got one side, and both sides are exactly the same. I'll show you in a little bit how we put this together so that it's, or make the template so that it's symmetrical. So I'm just using this etching tool. It's actually a file, but I really like it because it goes through the birch bark really easily, and then I can ream out the holes a little bit as well. But typically what's used is an awl, and just something to make the holes into the basket once it's come together. So the basket is symmetrical, or the template is symmetrical. If you fold it this way, it's the same as if you were to fold it this way. So you also get a symmetrical piece on either side. So I know that symmetry is very important in woodworking, carpentry, and things like that. And so this is one of the just one of the aspects that that I wanted to make sure I shared with you about this template. So, I always use cardboard because it's nice and stiff. If you're using just paper, it's really hard to keep that in place when you're etching or doing that. But if you're sitting at a kitchen table, like a lot of people do, they'll bring this home and they'll do it later. But I like doing everything right away so everything's still got a little bit of a dampness to it. And then I just take a regular pair of scissors and I start to cut out this template right from what I've etched here. And you really need to have this little bit of a convex area here where it's coming in, because this top becomes circular and you want the lip of it to be flat. And so that's why we make this cut, where it's not just straight across, there's a little bit of a curve to it. So I'm just going to moisten this up a little bit more so that it's a little bit more pliable. And there are areas here that we need to fold, and I don't want those areas to break. And so I just run my nail along here. You can use your etching tool, even your scissors, just to kind of give this area here where I'm going to fold a little bit of a fold so that it doesn't just snap on me. And that has happened before, where the birch is just a little bit too dry. And that's one of the reasons why I like to work with it right away, right when it's come off the tree. But you can always reconstitute it. See, there we go. It's like a little bit too dry on that side. So the outside is going to be, the inside is going to be our outside. And so I'm folding it very gingerly in order to not have it snap. And also wanting to just add some water there so that it folds nicely on this side too. So what I'm doing is I'm folding it along those areas where I said we had the notches here, and you just go straight down that. Give it a little bit of a fold. It doesn't have to be all the way like I did with the cardboard. So you've got something like this to begin with. Then you fold in these other areas here. So where it's notched in these corners, this is going to be your whole bottom piece. So all along this area here is where a fold is going to go, and this one as well, this side. So just showing you where I'm making my folds. So I'm using a really big needle and a full piece of sinew. Typically what you see is people taking apart sinew, and I use about the length of my arm. And then that's going to be folded in half, or the length of my outstretched arms. Then I can string it through this big darning needle. So as you can see, I've got the basket so that it's folded now. You're starting to see a square bottom, or a little bit of a rectangle actually. And then these other sides are folded so that these notches that I made become part of the bottom. Now I'm going to start to poke holes in it and start to string the sinew through it. What I'm trying to do is make sure that everything that I do on one side is the same on the other. So I'm poking these holes through, and I'm making them an equal distance apart so that it looks nice. And it holds it together. So what I've done is I've gone through 3 pieces of the birch bark, the inner flap and then the 2 outer flaps that I put together there. Now the reason why I went through all 3 of them at once is because now I'm going to sew those together with this sinew. But I'll just show you how I go through the first hole on the bottom, then the hole on one of the outer flaps, and then if I bring this in and match that up, this is an easy way to do it, or an easier way. Sometimes what I do is I put in a little peg that I'll make out of red willow. We will need a little bit of red willow for the top, and we'll have to figure out the circumference of this the top once I've got it together, so that I know how much willow we're going to need, the length of willow that we're going to need to put around the top to hold it. It becomes the lip. So we could just hold it up there and estimate it. I tend to like to use mathematical processes. So we will be using pi r squared, which is half of the circumference is the radius. We take that and we do pi, which is 3.14. So pi r squared is how you find the circumference. So it's interesting, you have to know the radius. And the way to find the radius is if we had this all together. Okay, we would measure. So I always bring this measuring ruler with me. And we go straight across to get the radius is half of this diameter, right? So this, if I had this all together and it was accurate, it would be 6.5. So we take 6.5 times 3.14 to find our circumference. So what I've done is I've folded this way and then I folded this way. You can make your folds either way. You can have them both going the same way or you can have them going the opposite way. It doesn't really matter, but that's what I did. And so the rest of the holes go along here. So there is a crack in this one because it is really dry, but I would fix that with sap or with resin, and that is a possibility to do that, to be able to do that. But it is a beautiful basket in spite of the fact that there is there's holes there. It would be really nice for keeping your sage in. So one side's complete. And we just have to finish off this other side. So right now what I know are the easy mathematical concepts in this birch bark making would be, measurement, symmetry, pretty easy concepts, but there are other mathematics that you can be focusing on when you do use when you're making a birch bark basket. You could be talking about the volume. There's difference in the volume of water than it is to the volume of another like a dry substance like rice, right? So I mean the volume is the volume, but depending on what you're putting inside here, how much water could fit in here, right? So that would be another mathematical activity that you could do. You could be looking at area as well. You can be looking at how can you convert the area of this template and doubling it to make a double size basket. There's a number of different things that one could do with this, and the wood ticks galore here. Just give me a second. Okay, so now I've got my holes for that. I've almost used my entire piece, and what I did was one whole arm length, but I think what I'm going to do is do maybe I'm going to do a little bit of this because it's going to end and I won't be able to knot it off in there. So you could do a decorative edge rather than putting a piece of willow around if you wanted, or you could do both. So these are actually called pinking shears, and they make a little zigzag edge. So I'm just going to show you an example of how you could, blaying up your basket a little bit more than what I'm doing here. And there are people I know who will make a lid for their baskets, and they use porcupine quills to decorate the top, a small portion of the basket. So what I've done is I've just gone through this with my pinking shears, with the zigzag edge. Yes, it would be a lot more work, but some people are okay with that. So you would put this around the edge, and it gives a little bit of a more decorative piece. I'm bit more decoration to your piece. The circular baskets, often they'll do that. They'll put one at the bottom and one at the top. So you would have to be able to measure and make sure that you have enough. That wouldn't be exactly enough. I would probably need a little bit more to go all the way around here. But for our purposes today, I wasn't planning to do that, but that's something that you can do. You could also save these and make etchings on them as well, and I've done that in the past where I've sat here with people and you know, while they're working and putting their basket together, I'll just etch some things and they'll take it home with them. It's just a little memento. So this is a birch bark basket with the inside showing and the outside in. And typically, as I mentioned, this could be etched with design, florals, usually for Anishinaabe people or, you know, maybe their clan, something like that. You know, the quill work that I've seen done was done by Dakota people. But there you have it. Birch bark basket made in Treaty 1 territory. We're very close to Anola here. And miigwech for letting me share some of our traditional knowledge with you. Miigwech.